home of Bill and Bettie Crawford, Celestial Collies. It's October 23rd, 1993. Wally Madison is operating the camera. I'm Susan Jocelyn. I'll be the moderator for the day. During this video, you're going to hear the birds call, whistle, ring their bells several times. While we were videoing, we didn't really notice them, but it became apparent when we watched the video later on. We want to let you know that this is not going on outside, it's actually on the video. Bill, what was it like being the breadwinner behind the Lady of Celestial?
Well, it was an exciting 38 years, or has been so far. Have a saying that it's difficult to live in the eye of a hurricane without getting wet, and I guess that probably describes it as closely as I can think of at the moment. It's been an exciting experience. Bettie's been able to accomplish a great deal with very few funds to accomplish it with, and it's been an amazing achievement as far as I personally am concerned, watching her these many years develop Celestial Collies to the state that it is today.
But you weren't always in the background. I know that at the beginning you were quite active in showing the collies.
Well, I think Bettie is a very intelligent person, and she realized to fulfill her dreams she needed to get me involved, and I think that's what actually happened. When we first met, Bettie had a champion, and this was really my first exposure to the collie. It was Carrico's New Look, and he had won the fraternity in 1949. He was about 13 years old at the time, and Bettie was not active breeding or exhibiting at that point. We moved to Midland, Texas, and New Look. We decided to try at that age as a stud. There was a bitch from England that an officer stationed nearby had brought and had heard that we were in town, and decided to do a test breeding, I guess, because we weren't sure that New Look would be able to. As a result, there actually was a litter, and from the litter we got a young bitch, and that was my first puppy exposure, called Charm. And Charm, I guess, kind of really charmed me into the whole thing, and I was really involved at that point in terms of the new activity.
Bettie, I know that you were involved in and interested in breeding and showing collies even before you met Bill. How did that come about? What sparked your interest?
Well, when I was real young, we could never have a big dog, and I had dogs like fox terriers. And a friend of mine lived in the country and had a collie, a Mahogany Sable. I thought that was the greatest dog I'd ever seen. And so when I was 18, I bought a collie pet. I went to a woman near Belton, Texas, that had a litter advertised for $50 and $35. And I bought one of the $35 ones. I couldn't afford the $50.
Well, even back then, though, that was quite a bit of money.
True. And this bitch was by a very famous dog, Champion Phil Collins, Prince of the Blues. And the stamp side was Bellhaven. But she was very mismarked. She was a sable-headed tri. But beautiful type bitch. So because I had a collie, I went to a dog show. And they're at College Station, Texas. And I walked in this building, and here was this huge tri dog, all ready to go in the ring, standing up on an X-pin. And I just zoned right over there. In those days, a 300 dog show was big, And I put my arms around this dog, and this gentleman turned to me and said, "Little girl, that dog is ready to go in the ring." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry." Well, that was Louis Carrico. So I stayed and watched him from the classes to go Western show that day. And I guess I was really suckered in right then. So I went on to breed the bitch, etc., and got started.
Well, now you touched on Louis Carrico. I know he was your mentor.
Definitely.
Can you tell us some of the things that he taught you?
Yes, he taught me just about everything. It was, I always said, and people who knew him well, that he was part dog himself. I mean, all he had to do was look at a dog and it reacted to him. But he did work hard at training his dogs. But he taught me all the details of head, because he always said anybody can learn movement. And, but he also, in those days, you stayed for groups, invest in shows no matter what. And I learned a lot by learning other breeds and types and movement, and sitting at ringside with people like Lewis and Pete Patterson and Lang Scarda. And I learned so much about structure and movement from different breeds. But the head priorities were very important to Lewis, and he taught me all of that. We'd go over and over, and he'd make me feel heads like I've done all my life when I've tried to teach people, and the good, the bad, in the middle. And he really taught me everything.
What lines was Louis working with?
Okay, at that time he had Lodestone bitches that he bought from Fred Kim, Orrin Kim's father. And he had a line that went back to Hurtsville through some dogs in Colorado at that time. And he bred those two lines, and then he brought in some of Pickhart's dogs at one time. Also, Hurtsville. Hurtsville is where he got his skulls, where the skulls were. They didn't have a lot else, but they were beautiful planes of head, beautiful flat bones going back, and the finest back skulls you've ever put your hands on. So Chris Castleman was a good friend of his, and taught him how to train dogs in a way and how to trim them, etc. Some of the real old-timers.
Well, Louis must have done quite some traveling then, because in those days that was quite a distance.
He went to Morrison, Essex every year, which was one of the old shows that probably very few people remember. It was on Mrs. Dodd's big estate. And he went to the Garden several years. And he went to California, of course, to the CC of A. And of course, his dog, Champion Caracos Clipper, won Winner's Dog and Best Winners at the CC of A here in Houston, Texas. Then the dog that Bill mentioned, Champion Caracos Clippers New Look, which was my first champion, won the Futurity in '49 in Anaheim. And his litter sister, Champion Caracos Littlest Angel, who went on to be a 4-time Best in Show winner, was best opposite to New Look in that Futurity, and incidentally was judged by Dr. McCain. If anybody's read all about, he was the black man that they wouldn't let come to the South to judge, and he was the most honest, wonderful judge I have ever seen. He was just really loved the Collie.
So were there other people other than Louis, or was Louis really the only person that
In the
gave
Southwest.
you?
Oh, yes, I have to say he was. I talked to other people, and I watched other dogs, and I talked. In those days, there were very few professional handlers, but Rex Vandeventer always handled Steve Bill's dogs. And Rex and I would talk. I mean, you knew everybody in those days. And, of course, there was still the days of the big kennels, like Mrs. Browning and Mrs. Zilch. And you just kind of got a mix mash from everybody. But as far as what I really learned, mainly, and went on to try to do myself Caraco talking, because I would spend hours down there, days. I mean, he couldn't help but teach me. I pushed him. Got yelled at a lot, but I learned.
So what virtues do you hold as being sacred that you can't live without?
Back skull and expression. Of course, I'm also, if anybody's ever seen my dogs, I'm a being on a nice, smooth, rounded muzzle. And living in the Southwest most of my life, I have had to have movement, because at that time there was only 2 specialty clubs in Texas way back when, and most all the time we showed under all-rounders. So movement was also very important. Also, one thing, after Bill and I married, he said, you can keep anything you want to, but you can't keep a crippled dog.
So Bill did have quite a bit of influence in what he was going to.
Yes.
go with. Well, what about, you talk about expression. That is a term that, it's easy to say. What does it mean to you?
I always use the term that I've written in several different articles, that a collie has to look at me right. A collie should not be, the old time saying was look of eagles. That's too harsh. That's more like a Doberman Pinscher. A collie should look alert but soft and caring. And you have to have the correct eye set and the correct set in the head with the right skull to get that soft expression. Now that's my opinion of collie expression.
Okay, well, what do you mean by set?
Where it's set the eyes, like the standard says, obliquely in the head, not too far forward, not a big full eye, but certainly not a squinched up little eye where you can barely see it and the dog can't barely see you, which we're getting some in our breeding programs today.
So you would say that a set of the eye is the important part in determining expression.
Which all goes with the back skull too.
Let's talk about how you went about creating the Celestial Collie family, because there definitely is a distinct look to the Celestial Collie.
Well, thank you for that. That was always my idea. I didn't care particularly, even if judges or people didn't like them. I wanted my dog to be able to walk in the ring and be recognized. I mean, that's an ego trip, and I think we all have a certain amount of that, or we didn't go through all this, right?
Right. Well, was that a very conscious effort?
Yes. Mrs. Browning, Ocala, used to run an ad in Dog News 100 years ago. I still have one somewhere. It was a long ad and came down the page, and it showed Stormcloud with his head turned, looking over his rear end. I don't know if you've all ever seen it, but and her slogan was, "The purest water is always found at the well." And I love the look of her dogs. And they were, here we go, already get on it, but they were inbred. And she was a very arty type person. Very different person. But I think we all have to be a little bit crazy to be in this business. And I just always thought if I could have a dog that looked at me like Stormcloud, and I had the pleasure of being told by Owen Kim in 1963 at Collie Club of America in Chicago. He says, not only does Thor look like him, but he's better than he was. And that was a big thrill.
That would be a big thrill.
So that's where I kind of got my idea, to set a type and try to keep it and improve upon it if possible.
Well, Bill touched on the breeding that produced Charm. Where did you go from there?
Let's see, where did we go? Actually, I never used Mulek in one. He was 13 at the time we had to get an affidavit. And I bred Charm to one of Lewis's dogs, Mr. Carico's dogs. Then, about that time, Beverly Dam Valparaiso had bought a little dog from me years before called Carico's Blue Note Supreme. And she, we had sort of kept in contact, but never really met each other in person. And Dick Warren and I, of Warhaven Kennels, went out to a dog show in West Texas. We were living in the middle of all, Dick and Bill and I at the time. And there was this bitch standing in the pen. And I just dropped dead. I mean, I said, who owns this bitch? And it so happened it was champion Altaisa's Silver Lightning, who was not a champion, and she was still in the puppy class. And I met Beverly, and she was by Blue Note, the dog I had sold her several years before. So it was recognizable to me that she was that type, but better in lots of places.
Well, I know Lining was an incredible producer. I also know that you were the one that first bred her. How did that come about, the leasing of Lining?
Well, Beverly had another bitch in that litter called Altaisa's Hot Scotch, and she really never knew which she liked the better of. So she had young children and everything, and didn't want to breed several litters at a time. So she called me, and offered me line for a litter, and actually said if I wanted her. But I thought, I can't take this bitch away from anybody. But Bev and I worked together then, and at about that time, Dick Warren had bought he wasn't a champion, he was 10 months old, Marielle's Midnight Star from Judy Mansure in California. And Dick and I were good friends living there in Midland, and he had ended up with an old Caraco dog named Champion Caraco's Boy Blue that Dr. James Gray had sold him when he went to medical school. So we had a lot of connections there, and we're good friends. So when I got Liney, and I had no idea, they were both young, very young. And we bred them together, and that's where the Thor litter, quote unquote, came from with the 6 champions.
And so from that, you got Champion Celestial's Thor Thunderbolt.
Correct, and 5 other champions.
Well, let's start then with some of those Celestial studs that there seemed to be one after another that finished and produced.
Well, let's see. Thor, I'm going to add one little thing about Thor before we go on. Thor was a born show dog. He made it so easy. He loved it. He thought everybody woke up every morning to see him. And Bill finished him.
I was going to say, wasn't that Bill's handling skills that produced
yes.
that great show dog?
I don't know if you could call it skills, but
Yes,
that was my entire career as far as being a handler was Thor. He was one of these flyers. His first birthday, we had gone into Oklahoma, a territory that nobody invades in those days, and he came out as Winter's Dog in 2 specialty shows, and we were sort of on a roll, and then Dick Warren and I went to Arizona for that specialty, and I think he won again. And then we hit some all-breed shows, and he finished in Santa Fe on his first birthday. And at that time, I was realizing that I was having all the fun and the glory.
I was staying home.
And Bettie was staying home doing the hard work. And I sensed that it needed to go a different direction in terms of the fun. So I actually quit handling at that point, and Bettie took over. And of course, she's more than that, an adequate handler, always has been.
Well, there never was another just completely boring showman, and that's what Crawford likes. You don't have to work, you just go in. But from Thor on down, Thor was only bred to 13 bitches in his whole life, and took twice to the same bitch. So 13, only 11 or 12 different bitches, and they were all Beverleys in Alteza. And he produced 7 American champions. None of these dogs, a lot of them didn't go to show people either, and 4 Canadian champions. But I kept bitches from then on. I'd like to say a little bit about keeping an outcross stud dog, if it's okay.
Yes, please.
I never believed in it. I had not been taught that way. I didn't think that way. Because for my thinking, to have a pre-potent, good producing stud dog, they should be at least line bred. But I was aware in the first litter of Thors, bred to charm, this half English, half Mulet bitch, that he was going to be very dominant and pre-potent for his type, the things I had in him that I hadn't had before, his movement. So he produced that way entirely, which was really odd. But I started keeping bitches then. So everything went back to Thor, the stud dogs and the bitches, all through the line. And still today, the one I have left. So
you kept bitches from Thor, but I know that the male line came down from him.
Right.
So
well, in his first litter, what I did, I went back to Mr. Caraco, and here's where I had a great advantage over a lot of people. I'd been working with Lewis for several years prior, and knew the line real well, knew what it produced. And I went back to Lewis and got hold of a bitch called Celestial's Caraco's Gina. and who was a gorgeous bitch. And by breeding her to Thor, I started getting all these bitches that I kept and finished. In fact, in her lifetime, I think she had 8 puppies in all total, and 5 of those finished. So then I get bitches and took back to Thor. Then I got Champion Celestial's Crescent Moonbeam, which was a Gina Thor daughter, and started inbreeding Thor on her, and then that's where I started getting the male line in Champion Celestial's Lunar Pasha.
See, don't lose sight of the fact that this, you have to go back to Blue Note, who produced Lining, who then was outcrossed with Judy Mansher's Midnight Star, and now she's going back to where Blue Note came from, which is Carico, to start amplifying the assets that Carico had to work with.
Correct.
So inbreeding really was what helped you, made it possible to set what we think of as the celestial look.
Yes. And remember this, you never really know what you have till you inbreed. Good qualities, bad qualities, health problems, whatever. Then you know. Then you know which direction to go, if there's a direction at all. So, to me, now I'm not saying everybody can do this, because the main thing about inbreeding, I've given talks on it and everything, everybody thinks, good, we'll go home and we'll breed this brother and sister, like I did, and do all these great things. But you've got to know what's back of those dogs. You've got to be able to recognize the faults of the 2 dogs you're breeding, whether they complement each other. There's just a lot there.
It's not as simple as
going home and breeding 2 dogs,
You have to be really aware of what stamps you're looking for, and that's what you're trying to build on. And you can only do that by line breeding. You can outcross till the sea turns white, and it'll never happen until you can start amplifying the assets that you're trying to work with, and it gets to the point where at a given period of development, that Betty can look at a 6-week-old puppy and know exactly what it's going to be because she's seen it before. Where if you outcross, you've got to wait till you're a year and a half old to know whether you got it or not. That's one of the benefits of life.
Well, also comes in here something that I think is very important in any breeding you do, is that you have the selection. You've got to watch a lot of things when you're inbreeding, and you've got to know what to look out for and what to guard against. So that, I read all I could about inbreeding, and everything that Browning ever said or did, and I talked to people who I respected in genetics, like Dr. Jim Gray with Cat Haven, Collie used to be years ago. And I had in my mind's eye what I wanted to keep going with.
Well, let's go back then to the stud dogs. You've done your inbreeding back into the Carico line, and you've produced Moonbeam. Now where are you going?
Well, Moonbeam and Thor produced Champion Celestial's Lunar Pasha and Celestial Shower of Gold in the same litter. They were litter mates, and Goldie was a sable merle with 2 blue eyes, which didn't matter to me at all for what she did for the line in the way of producing. But Pasha was a very dominant stud. In fact, Pasha possibly was better in Thor than Thor, and a couple of things I tried to improve on, like under jaw. I didn't know how dominant he was going to be. But Goldie, we were so new in the inbreeding then, as far as I'm concerned, Goldie was a completely different type bitch than her litter mate Pasha. So she was a taller, longer bitch. And then after that, I took Moonbeam to Champion Altaza's Ariat, which was a Thor son. But Ariat also was kind of people laugh at this, but he was an outcross for me because he had some Wincall blood in him, through a bitch that Beverly Lee's called Party Doll. So to me, that was kind of bringing in something else. But then I started on the real inbreeding. I bred Goldie and Pasha. And that's when I started really keeping a lot more stud dogs.
Yeah, but from what you've just said, Goldie and Pasha were brother and sister,
Right.
but they phenotypically were very different.
Phenotypically, they were very different. And to me, that's the main thing, that the two dogs fit. You can look at pedigrees all day and think, oh, this is going to be good and that's going to be good and all this. You've got to see your animals. You've got to know what you're trying to get from them. And knowing the lines from the Carico stuff and knowing what Dick was getting out of Midnight Star and what Beverly was getting out of Silver Lining, bred differently and all, was a great help.
So what did you get when you bred these two litter mates together?
Two of the best dogs I've ever had.
Were they one of one type, one of another type, or were they a combination of the types?
They were a combination. Champion Celestial's Perfect Harmony was one of the best dogs I've ever had my hands on, if I did breed him. And then, as far as I'm concerned, the very best dog was Celestial's White Lightning, which was a homozygous Merle. And so I carried on, going back to Harmony's daughters, out of these several different bitches, back to Harmony or back to Lightning.
Now, Lightning came after Harmony, though.
The next litter, yes.
Let's back up and talk about Harmony. What great attributes did
Harmony was
possess?
a different puppy. It kind of scared me because here I'd been getting all these gorgeous little low to the ground, short couple, beautiful headed muzzle dogs, and Harmony came along and he was this gangly puppy, and I never had that. My dogs never went through all those stages that some lines do, which is neither here nor there. So it may be good or it may be bad, but I know my dogs held their quality and got better. But we had just moved down here to San Antonio, and Mr. Carico was still alive at the time, and he was about 3 months old. For some reason, I thought, this is the prettiest puppy in so many ways, but he's going to do these things that I'm not used to. But Louis came over from Austin one Sunday, he and Judy, his wife, and I kiddingly said, and Toots Stevens, a friend of mine from Arizona that owned Champion Pasha, was down here visiting. I kiddingly said, Louis, I don't know whether to put this dog to sleep or give him away as a pet. I just don't know what he's going to do. Well, talk about, and Louis never came unglued that much. He came unglued. That's the best, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I was only teasing. But I said, you've seen enough of my puppies. You know he's different. And he said, yeah, but he's going to be it. And he was. He reproduced beautifully. And he wasn't a nonstop showman. I had to show him. But he showed for me. And he was a bigger dog, which I was very pleased with, than Pasha had been. But he was one of the great dogs of all time in my estimation.
Maybe you should have gotten your handler back.
I should have got my handler back. You're right.
Well, by then I was definitely retired.
Yes.
Well, do you know how many bitches you bred to Harmony?
Oh, I think 12, 13. I never bred. Now, I bred more of my own to Harmony, probably. But outside bitches, not very many at all.
Do you know how many champions did Harmony produce?
Gosh, I've forgotten. 12. Lightning produced 17 or 18, but some people did use Lightning that had Brandwin dogs who phenotypically fit my dogs much better than other lines. And they finished a bunch out of Lightning.
The homozygous.
Yes. In fact, you own one. But I really can't remember, but it was 12 or 13, or maybe it was 17 that Harmony produced.
And then, of course, one of his greatest sons, who never finished, was Celestial's White Lightning,
Of course.
who would have been your next main stud dog.
But I did have other people that would use him that wouldn't. Very few people use my stud dogs. So that was fine with me. Visiting bitches are not fun.
Well, let's talk about Lightning. What were his great attributes?
Well,
Why was he able to produce
he
so
was
many
so
champions?
inbred. Lightning was extremely inbred. Lightning had probably he was the prettiest balanced dog that I have ever seen. He had this gorgeous head. He was a big dog, big bone dog, and he had this gorgeous smooth head. Several people that really I respect their opinions said it felt like glass to put your hands on it. He had a short body. He was low to the ground, but he was still a very big dog, very deep dog. He moved beautifully. He was extremely smart. I think most of your double-diluteds are that I've been around. And being as inbred as he was, he could be bred outside the line and do well. If people wanted to get more of that type than what they had, like people who had less bone and higher on leg, not as full, pretty muzzle and underjaw, he could help them a lot. Then a lot of the people that bred to the people that bred to Lightning, I had a dog named Shadowhaven Celestial Chris, who was out of a bitch, Lilting Lyric bred to Harmony, and he was a tri-dog. And a lot of people would bring those Lightning outcross bitches back to Chris, and then they would really get the stamp of Celestial on them. And that went well for some of the Brownwood people.
What would you consider, or maybe you don't even want to think about this, what would you consider the stud dog that did the most for Celestial Collies?
Oh, Lord. So, well, I guess Thor, because he got it started. But as I went along in the line, as far as what I kept in my own kennel, it would have to be Harmony.
What bitch do you think would you give the credit the most to?
Well, Moonbeam, Goldie, and Lyric. That's three bitches that I bred more than once, and because I didn't raise that many litters, I didn't have that many dogs. They all three, bred correctly, produced beautifully for me. It got to the point where I had about 6 or 7 stud dogs down here in the kennel, and it kind of got to the point with the last 3 or 4 generations where I could use, people would leave it up to me who knew me. If they shipped a bitch, I could use any of those stud dogs, and they primarily would produce the same way because due to their inbreeding. Mm-hmm. And if they sent me a bitch that was a little too high on leg, I had a dog named Celestial Dakota Gold, who was also a sable merle. He had one tiny blue flag, but I never showed him. And he was Lightning's brother, and he was a little higher on leg and a little longer. So Lightning and he could be switched around depending on the bitch herself, phenotypically. And people have said, do what you think, and then I'll see the bitch and call them and tell them what I thought.
Well, switching most of these stud dogs are blue merle, homozygous merle. Dakota Gold, you just said, was a sable merle. You had to get into quite a bit of different color breedings.
Yes, that's for sure.
What kind of things did you discover with this different color breedings?
Well, I really don't know where my color interest started unless it was back with Duchess, my first dog, because she was a sable-headed dry. Nobody'd ever seen one before.
Yeah, only you would have something like that.
But I like color genetics for another reason, which I think is very important. It's really the only thing we do in dogs, breeding-wise, that we can determine what's going to happen. You may not always get everything that can happen as far as the colors in a litter, but you know when you breed 2 dogs, if you know basic genetics at all, what colors are going to come down the pike. And that interested me. And then I got really interested, going back to what Bill said, Charm, being half English, was bred to Thor, both tricolors, and she produced a litter of 7, and they were all silver tips. And Lewis and Ed Pickhart and Orrin Kemp, all 3 had told me that some of the old Belhaven dogs had the silver tippy.
What do you mean by silver tippy?
It's a gray, like Bill's hair, salt and pepper. And most of the time, that would, in fact, Pasha even had it when he was young. Most of the time, they only hold it over the withers and on the skirts. But I have had several in coming down from that particular breeding, where all 7 of them were silver tipped and stayed silver tipped. That never, even after losing their puppy coat, didn't lose their silver tipping. But whenever you get it, one good thing about it is the tries, they don't rust, and their undercoat is a moss gray color, and you always have a really good hard texture tricolor coat.
Does it only seem to show up in the tricolors and the?
No, it showed up in Canada in a sable bitch, and I have colored pictures of her. The girl sent me that I sold a couple of dogs to, and she finished them there. And she bred them together. They were both celestial, not real inbred, but I was starting on the inbreeding. And she had a couple of sables. And I've noticed it on the Merles when they're babies, but it fades in with the other colors. But you can tell on your tries when they're babies. If when they're still, right after they dry out, put them under a strong light, and it'll be there. I even had a smooth that had it.
Well, when you do so much, when you have so many blues and you're doing so much blue to blue breeding, you're getting a lot of double dilutes. What?
I was extremely lucky, Susan. It finally caught up with me. But I've never had the over 1 in a litter. But until the last time I bred Lyric, and I had 4. But remember, I didn't have a lot of puppies in a litter. I had very small litters after the inbreeding started. I want to say that's possibly, people have said to me, didn't you use size and didn't you lose size and temperament? I never did, because I was so selective about keeping bigger stud dogs. But I do think that possibly I lost size of litter as far as numbers. Mm-hmm. However, I kind of liked it like that. 4 puppies and 3 of them will finish. Who would fight that? I mean, it was easier on you and the bitches. So, size of litter would be the only thing that I could say that the inbreeding, if people want a whole lot of puppies in a litter.
Was Lightning the only homozygous that you did keep?
Yeah. No, I kept a bitch called Celestial's Frosted Mistletoe, who was a double diluted sable merle.
Hmm.
She was a white dog. Instead of the blue spots like homozygous merles, she had the sable spots. And she was a beautiful bitch. She was out to Celestials, for heaven's sakes, bred to a half-brand one. No, she was bred to one of my bitches from Mistletoe. And she produced like I thought she would. Bred to tricolor dogs. She produced half sable merles and half blue merles. Right down the line, 4 puppies, 2 and 2. And I bred her twice. And then I had another one that I sent to Beverly Damp at Alteza out of Saki. I think she named it Alteza Welcome Celestial or something like that. We called her Welcome. And she kept her and bred a couple of litters out of her. But that's the only ones I kept. But really, until the last litter with Lyric, in fact, I had many blue to blue, not many, but lots of blue to blue breedings where I never got sable merles. Because I'd have like maybe 3 puppies.
Homozygous merles.
I'm sorry, homozygous merles, thank you. But I was very, very lucky until that litter with Lyric.
And we don't think of too many sable celestial dogs. Did you have some sable?
Yes.
You had to because you had sable merles.
That's right. possibly the best one was Celestial's Heavenly Chimes. It's up there in that photograph when she's 13 years old up there on the wall right now. She ended up living her life out at Dr. Gray's in Atlanta. But then I had Champion Celestial's Devil Duster. Now he was a litter mate to Ariat, Champion Altaza's Ariat, who was by Thor out of one of Beverly's champion bitches, Russet, Champion Altaza's Russet. And Beverly gave him to me. And we were living in El Paso at the time, and going home from Amarillo to El Paso, I got this hideous dust storm. That's why I named him Devil Duster. And I sold him to Henry Oyama in California, and he finished very easily. But not a lot of sables. I have nothing against sables. It's just that I like blues better when I was breeding. Maybe because, too, when I started as a kid, which has been, just a few years ago, Mr. Carrico was the only one in the Southwest that had blue merles. I mean, everything was sable right down the line, very few tries even. And I just fell in love with the color. I thought it was different. I thought it was interesting. And of course, Miss Browning had so many gorgeous blues. And I'd see the pictures of them, and I just enjoyed the color. I thought it was fun to deal with it.
I think, at one time, if you were around in the early 60s, the quality of the blue merle was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. To the point that I threatened that we will stop doing this collie thing if you ever bring one of those home. It was a challenge, I guess, to then start perfecting a collie that was a blue merle that was acceptable, and I think she's done a tremendous job in that respect.
Well, there were other good blue merles, but not particularly down in our part of the world.
No, our part of the country was just
after Lewis quit breeding. It was something. You'd have to go to the National to see a halfway decent blue merle,
So there wasn't very many in the open blue class then?
Oh, no, hardly at all.
Did you find judges ignoring the
Only
winner of the class and the winner's
way
class?
back when I first started, yeah. Because that's when Parader was so popular, and of course Steve had some gorgeous dogs, but they were sable. And Rex was handling them all over the country, and of course Miss Ilch had mostly sables, except for Black Douglas of Allstead. I think most all of hers were sables. And and Pickard was a huge Lodestone. Let's look at Lodestone. I don't even know if they ever had a try. And I used to read all their ads and everything, So sable was the thing.
Well, I think Judy Mansher's was making some inroads with tricolor.
Right, and the West
at
Coast.
That point in the early 60s. Everything else seemed to be sable. And then I guess the next step was the blue merle. And then came smooths, as far as evolution is concerned.
I found judges, by the time we got up to the late 60s, acceptable on the blues unless they had a blue fleck or a blue eye. And that bothered them. But fortunately, I didn't have any real blue eyes except in my sable merles, which I didn't show.
Well, with having so many blues, and did you discover any of the breedings of blue merle to a sable producing odd colors? I mean, your sable merles that I remember looked like sables.
Well, Goldie was the only one. Goldie stayed spotted forever. She was a very different, when she was born. She could have passed for a white with merling. It was the weirdest thing. But she did stay spotted all her life. And but my other sable merles that finished and everything, you would never, everybody says, oh, you can always see a blue hair on their ear. Well, that's not always true. In fact, Mr. Carrico had a sable merle one time. The man, a real good friend of ours named Earl Teslaff in Dallas on. And I said, this is a sable merle. And Earl said, no, it isn't. Finally, out in the bright sunlight, I found one blue hair right here on her stomach. And sure enough, we bred her, and she was a sable girl.
Did you ever, in deciding who to breed to who, consider what color the animals
No.
were?
I bred collies, not color. No. I might as well have been a blind man as far as color.
So
I think you have to judge collies, not colors.
That's right.
If you're gonna,
That's really funny because when I first started judging back in '72, everybody was bringing me all these merles. And if they only knew, I'm more critical of the merle than any other color. And I think for about 4 years there, I put up mostly sables. But because they knew I was known for merles, it was just phenomenal. And I really am. I'm pickier, I guess, about them than those colors.
well, when you've lived with as many
Yeah.
as you have. Betty, let's talk about the fact that there have been many other gifts to the collie fancy that you've given. You've started several clubs over the years.
I enjoyed that very much. I always was an enthusiastic club member. And I felt if you had 3 or 4 good people, workers, you could put on dog shows and, really get more interest in your breed in that area. And we've lived in some different areas, Bill and I have. And West Texas Collie Club, I started back in the 60s. Yeah. And then we also, Guy Malden and I started the West Texas Shelton Sheepdog Club about the same time, 2 specialty clubs. At the time in Texas, for years, we had only 2 clubs. And Dallas, for years, even when I first started showing, had their specialty clubs in conjunction, specialty shows in conjunction with their Albury Club there. And then South Texas Collie Club, Houston, the bigger area, had 2 clubs. Well, then Midland was started. We had all the A matches and went through all that, and the Shelter Club out there. And then I got one off the ground in El Paso and had the first A matches, and then we moved, and it never got any further than that. Down here, a girl named Linda Kelly and I started the San Antonio Collie Club, and it's still going well. And then Jerry White and Mary Nell Speck and I started the Austin Collie Club, and it's still going well. I've enjoyed all my working clubs. I think it's, we don't have anymore, or never did really have a lot of education in our club meetings because I've always lived in areas where there were not a lot of collie people. And you have a hard enough time putting on dog shows every year. And maybe we'd have one educational program every 3 or 4 months. But I'm a firm believer that you start at rock bottom on education. I mean, anybody that's interested in going to a dog show, they all say, oh, well, I want to learn how to groom. I said, I want you to learn how to read the standard and apply it. To me, the dog showing end of it is really important. We all have to do that, and I thoroughly enjoy it, as you all know. But winning isn't everything if you want to create something. And I feel that there are not enough people. I know so many people now, and most of them are really great people, that will go out and buy from every line in the country and get whatever dog it was replaced once from whichever line. Then they'll have one, they'll get a few points, and another from another line that may even finish, and they'll breed those 2 together. And it doesn't matter that they don't fit pedigree-wise, phenotypically-wise, anything else. Oh, but they pointed. And that, to me, maybe you get one good puppy out of that if you're lucky.
Well, you've done quite a bit in the education. I know that earlier in the day you were telling us that you wrote several articles for the Old Cues magazine, and also been a frequent speaker at seminars. Can you give us an idea of some of the topics you've discussed at the seminars you've given?
I think the first one I spoke at was in Florida, and it was on whelping and caring for puppies and some of the things that can come up when you got bad mothers, good mothers, and in-between mothers, and conditions that we didn't know a lot about at that time health-wise. Then I was asked to write this program for Minnesota, Minneapolis, how to create a line. And I started from way back, kind of like we have today, only in much more detail, and showed pictures of the different dogs as they came up. And I never did continue on with it. It went up to about, Champion, Boom Boom, whatever his registered name was, Natural High, Champion Celestial Natural High was a puppy, and there was still a lot more finished after that. But I've given that several times, trying to show what they wanted to know was how I got into the intricate part of the inbreeding. I've given stud dog talks, but I've given all sorts, and of course the main thing I've given all over is the color talk, color genetic talk, whereas I show the matrix slides and symbols, and then show the colors, show dogs pictures, the colors they can get from all these different matings.
Betty, we talked about how you went about creating the celestial family earlier in the day, but I think that's something we want to mention again, that really the celestial collie was a very easily recognizable type out there in the show ring, and there weren't that many dogs here. How many dogs typically did you have?
I think the most we ever had is when we moved from El Paso to Tucson, and I had 13, and 3 of those were puppies I were keeping at that time for show.
And how many litters would you say you had a year?
I figured it up one night. Dr. Gray and I did, and I think it was just a little less than a litter a year.
And how many puppies in a
Oh,
litter?
Lord, very few. Now, at first, there were, 8, say, but in the last, 25 years, I'd say, I've never had over 4 or 5 puppies max. 5 was, that's, as I said before, the one thing that I saw inbreeding created less amount of dogs in a litter, which was very fine with me, because you get 5 dogs, you get 4 that buy fittage, as I said before, and it's much easier to raise them and keep their temperaments and their coats and all, and get them to the right homes than you have a big litter. So that I did not have over a massive amount.
That's in and of itself phenomenal that you could create a definite type
Well,
with
that's due to the inbreeding.
an obvious small number of animals.
That's due to the inbreeding, and like I said, the people that did use, the outside people that came in and used the studs, were very few, but phenotypically we knew by the end of the certain era that the certain lines fit better with mine than others. So it was getting to the point too, in the last few years of, unfortunately we have a lot of problems, which I had looked out on and didn't have and didn't want to get, and I got to where I'd see a dog I'd want to breed to, and then I'd find out something, and I thought, why bring in problems? You've always had your own, and the gene pool just didn't get that much bigger. So the dogs kept looking more alike.
Are you still out there on the seminar circuit, so to speak?
Not a lot. I think I spoke at Oklahoma 4 or 5 years ago. We were just trying to figure that out, and then I've spoken at Houston. And then I do little talks to clubs around here, depending on, they'll ask me for certain subjects. I've done quite a few of the Sheltie clubs recently on color. They're beginning to wonder why they can't have homozygosis and sable merles. Yet 2 of the 9 Shelties I finished were sable merles, so it's got a bit in the blood.
Now, Betty, you've also taken your involvement with the collies into the judging realm. At what point did you decide that that's what you wanted to do?
2 people pushed me into that. Well, 3. My husband, Nick Malarlo. I don't know if anybody remembers Nick Malarlo. He was a collie judge from Chicago for years. And Dr. Jim Gray, who always wanted me to. I really didn't want to at the time I did, because I was still doing my thing here as far as raising puppies, and I love to judge. I judged a lot of all-breed matches and stuff like that, but and not on a regular basis that I want to. And once you get to doing it, I think I learn still, and always will, every time I have a judging assignment. It is very educational experience to judge other lives and other dogs, because you don't have to tell anybody what you think, and yet you can learn from putting your hands on other lives. So, and I thoroughly enjoy people. I really do. I have a ball judging, and everybody's always been very kind and nice, except for one or two instances. And I think it's a lot of fun. And now that I'm not raising collies anymore, I enjoy it even better, because I think, well, I'm not competing with these people. But
do you have any difference in your eye for a dog
No.
between a judge and as a breeder?
no. I know what I want. I know exactly what I want, and you can't always get even anything you half want, but you have to put up that day that best dog in your mind's eye. But I have never changed my mind about anything. I have accepted faults in other dogs that I have judged that I wouldn't accept in my own kennel when I was still breeding. But you're going to have to do that in anything. But no, I have never changed what I think a collie should look like in my mind's eye, whether I'm wrong or right. I mean, I know what I want.
As a judge, you've got a lot of responsibility for the future of the breed.
Right.
What do you think your responsibilities as a judge are in that regard?
Well, the first thing I want to say is you can't carry your eye certificate in the ring. You can't carry whatever problems else you may have. You can't tell the judge that. So when I go out there, even though I know certain things, of course you can hear anything in dogs, but I cannot let that waver my decision if that's the dog I want to put up. Because I'm supposed to be judging that dog on that day, and so it may be carrying whatever. I still have to judge the dog as a collie in my mind's eye, and I've always said, I hope I don't have any bad enemies, but if I do, it was my worst enemy or my best friend. I try to do what's on the right end of the lead, the dog. And I think every judge has that responsibility.
We've thrown this term around. Maybe we ought to just talk about this term, an eye for a dog. What do you think that means?
You're born with it. I'm not bragging, but I've been told that many times, and that I have seen people who desperately over the years want to learn, who really would just give their eye tooth to learn. And you can spend hours and hours and hours with them. You can show them. And incidentally, I want to add this. Most of the people that I have really helped that have stuck with it, I have shown those people my own dogs and gone over the standard. This is wrong and this is right. Several of the collie clubs I've started, I used to take 5 and 6 of my own dogs and the standard. We're not going to have grooming programs, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to learn the standard first. When you all ask the right questions about what I'm going to talk about, maybe then we need to know how to train a dog to show, etc. And I've even done that here in the San Antonio area, over in Austin several times. Go through the standard and take 3 or 4 of your own dogs, naturally, not anybody else's, and show the difference and what's right and what's wrong. Because, every dog, there's no perfect one yet, even though we all may think we've had one. That's the way to teach people. People can read the collie standard every day before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then whatever is sitting in their backyard, they'll apply to it. And I'm serious. I've seen it happen. So, the eye for a dog, another reason I think I may have an advantage is, like I said, when we first began, Louis Carrico, when I was assistant handler to him when I was real young, he made me learn other breeds, other movement especially. And we would watch. You never thought about leaving till Bestie show was over. Of course, Best in Show could be over at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at those small shows. But you did get to watch breeds. You did get to hear other breeds talk. And I still love to do it. Since I'm enjoying the whippets, no problem in grooming. They're your wash and wear dog. You do it all at home. And I'll go up and sit at ringside and watch other judges and listen to other breeders. Akita's a breed I'm not even interested in. I sat by, didn't know it at the time, the top Akita breeder in the country. And she and I got to talking about jewelry of all things. And her dog was in the ring, and I said, I don't know what he's going to do, but I love that male, the one that's not a special, that won't Winter's dog. And she said, that's my dog. I'm the top breeder in the country. Well, he did go up, thank God, over the specials. But you learn from watching other breeds. And I know most people now, they show their dog, they don't win the class. If they go second, they have to stay according to the rules. But they load up and go home. They're never going to learn. They're not talking to the people who do win, whether the people who do win are right or wrong. They're mad at the judge, probably. I don't know. They're mad at the other exhibitor who beat them. This is supposed to be a sport, people. What's happened to it?
So I would feel that you think that you need an eye for a dog, not only to be a judge, but also
to be
a breeder.
A breeder. If you want to create something that will be established, and if you want to just win, go out and buy all the dogs from different lines in the country. But for God's sake, study a little genetics before you start breeding all those lines together.
Betty, judging is a difficult task, I would think. And you've already touched on the fact that you're judging the dog. How do you keep? You know so many people in the collie breed.
Yeah.
How do you keep
And
that?
that's something's happened to me over the years. There's one person that has shown to me every time I'm in with 1,000 miles of where this party lives. I dearly adore this human being. They will always bring me 4 and 5 dogs. I've never even given them a class, let alone reserve. And that kind of gets you, I think, why are these people coming back? But I keep praying every time I walk in a building and I see them over there grooming, I think, please God, let them have a good dog today. But I don't think of it that way, Sue. I have to think of it that if these people have paid this entry fee to come and get my opinion of their animals. And maybe today I would put you up, but that same dog tomorrow with different competition, you might go third in the class. So it's that dog or bitch that day that I think that I need to be very honest about. The hardest thing in the world is to have a poor class and not know where. Wally knows that, and not know where to start at 1.
And where do you start?
Well, I start at 1. Here's the way I feel. Of course, AKC doesn't like this, but I always feel that maybe that person with that dog, if I excuse it for lack of merit, someday that person might get with somebody like you, and you might teach them something, and they might create something. Because they've got to have some desire to be there with this ugly dog. Or either some dishonest breeder sold it to them and said, this is a show dog, its mother and daddy are champions. That happens too, as we all know. But I keep thinking, well, maybe somebody, and if I discourage, and I pray those people will come over and talk to me later, and lots of times they have. And I start out with the same thing I'm sure most judges do when this happens. Well, it's always nice to have your first dog. But what I would do, and then I go to a breeder, buy a line bred bitch, keep this as your pet, and study, and this kind of stuff. You go into all that. But I hate to withhold. Of course, I disqualify if it's no testicles or limping and all that. That's obvious. But you never know. We were all that novice in that ring that first time with our dog. And I know the first time I went in, and I was very lucky that first time. And I showed under someone who's never put my dogs up since. But I went in and to the Dallas Specialty Show, and Lois had groomed the dog. I knew to bathe her and cut her whiskers, and that's about all I did. Took my leave. And I met him there and went reserve from the puppy class, and all the biggies from all over were there. And she wasn't that good a bitch, don't get me wrong, but of course I was hooked. I didn't even know to go back in for reserve. I was going back to the crates. But, I think as a judge, if you just have to look yourself in the mirror. And if you feel as strongly about it as I feel like most honest judges do, that you have to put up the dog that day.
Do you have any thoughts of, I know you're into whippets now and breeding whippets, have you got any thought of perhaps expanding your judge's license?
No, I just did my first whippet sweepstakes 3 months ago. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Several reps have asked me to go on and get the whole herding group and all, but to be real frank, I think I know most of the breeds in the herding group. Well, not certainly as good as some of the judges. But I don't like to live out of a suitcase that much. And maybe someday I might get my whippet license because I love the breed and I know the breed now. And it's taken me 5 years for me to sit and say this. And I mean, I have been to all their nationals. I've been to all their big Midwest and East Coast specialty shows. But I think any breed, and Liz Carrico used to say this, you have to have a good one before you can learn it. And I just happened to get a good one given to me by Dr. Gray. And my whole outlook changed after I had a good one to get in there with. And I learned, from that. And no two people ever have the same eye, as we all know. But whippets are a lot easier to learn than collies and shelties.
Do you enjoy judging more than when you were actively breeding and exhibiting?
No, I enjoy breeding. I enjoy the puppy box, even though it was work. I love to watch puppies grow up. And to see if my decisions are right or wrong or in between. That's the part I love. It got to be a drag, dragging a bunch of big dogs to a show, and the coats my dogs had, and keeping them groomed. As most people who know me, all the old champions were shaved. The minute they finished, I shaved them. But, no, I enjoyed the breeding end of it.
You never really did special any dogs.
No.
Why was that?
No. Mrs. Browning, here again I quote one of them. She said and wrote one time, and probably a lot of people aren't going to like what I say, but it was said by a real creator of dogs, Mrs. Browning. People who special all the time, I always think they don't have anything good up and coming to take to the dog show. And that stuck. You know how when you're young, now it's different nowadays because we go for these #1 dogs and all this big hoofty-doo, But living where I lived in Southwest, plus not being married to a multimillionaire, I could not make a top 10 dog. I made top 10 many times on the stud dogs for breeding purposes, what they produce. But I could not go out and go to dog shows every weekend and fly all around the country. Didn't want to. I don't think collies do that well. Some breeds do. Whippets, example. Doesn't bother. Shelties, it doesn't bother me as much. But that's just wasn't my bag to have the #1 collie. I think it's great for people who want to do it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not being critical. But I just like something new coming along.
Thank you very much for inviting us here to your home and the hospitality that you've shown and the openness that you've displayed in our interview. We really hope that the viewers enjoy this small look into what Bill and Bettie Crawford and Celestial Collies were all about.
Thanks, Susan. I would like to add that the greatest part of being in the dogs, besides the collies themselves, are the friendships that we have borrowed, the fun we've had, and some people that carried on the line, like Susan. It means so much to you after all the years you worked so hard. And I want to thank Wally and Phyllis for coming down and doing this. I really appreciate it from all of you.
It's been a real trip, and I guess the greatest part of it is it's not quite over with yet.
Thanks. this, it was in the first time, it was in the very early 1960s, very early. And I had taken a tricolor bitch that had some English blood in her and bred to my champion stud dog at the time, which was Thor. And here come all these tricolored puppies that weren't tricolored. They turned this gray color. There was 6 of them. So, being inquisitive, I talked to everybody I could from the old timers in those days. And Orange Kim and I were good friends, and that was Lodestone Collies. We've been writing about this and talking. And he came up with an idea. I had written Dr. Lee Ford, if any of y'all remember her, and she didn't have any idea. So I'd written universities and genetics, etc., and I did, to my best, a 25-generation pedigree on these 2 dogs, color pedigree, which was not easy within itself. I couldn't find quite all of them in the English dogs. But Orange Kim finally said to me one day, he just happened to phone me one night, he said, I just thought of something. He said, about 5 years ago, there was a dog food salesman by our place. He lived in Marion, Indiana. And he mentioned that he had seen some of these silver collies and had heard of them in Scotland when he was over there for a visit. And Oren at the time didn't ask any more, he just went right on. But he reminded him of that. Well, as it ended up, to make a long story short, I got this man's name, and the dog food salesman said, this has been 15 years, and the man was elder then. So I just by chance wrote this man a letter. His name was Bob Trade. It's one of those kind of names you'll remember all your life, because I've been trying to trace a bunch of this down. He was 98. His 92-year-old sister said he couldn't write anymore. She was taking care of him. All this is the God's truth, I'm telling you. I got this letter from her, and his father and mother, and he, up until the time he was about 40, had raised collies, Collies as they call them, in the Highlands of Scotland. And he said that primarily all the dogs they had were silvertip. Now, I also know that way back before I was even in dogs, Mike Kennedy had shown some Belhaven dogs that carried a great deal of silver tipping. Ed Pickard had known some of them, and Louis Carrico, they told me about. But as far as, I did not actually get my answer, because nobody told me if these puppies were born tricolor. But I had a feeling they were tricolors, and I test bred 2 or 3 of them, and Pat Quisenberry, who had one of these lizards, test bred, lizards, one of hers, and they did breed as tricolors, and after their puppy coat, they came back as tricolors, except for the featherings. In doing all this, I ran into a book in the library called Dominant and Elution, Other Coat Things in Collies, written by A.S. Mitchell in 1935. And he stated in this, I'm not going to read you but one paragraph, he called roan. Roan in dogs is a color formed by a mixture of colored and white hairs. In this respect, it resembles the type of coat color known as silvery. It exhibits a great deal of individual variability in its expression in dogs as it does in rodents and other animals. The general feeling is that in most cases roan is dominant to the regular pieballing color. But while this may be commonly true, there are enough exceptions and complications to require qualifications in its genetic behavior. Cases have been recorded in cockers and collies in which a puppy born solid black has progressively shown an increasing number of white or silver hairs scattered throughout its coat until it is finally very clearly called a roan. I didn't like the word roan, so I stuck with silver tipping. But that is something that I'm sure probably you've had that too, Judy, haven't you?
I haven't had them born that color, but I've had them turn that color. You've seen a lot of mine that have
I've seen your silver. Like some of mine.
In the withers and in the...
Well, mine would be born black, but by day 3, I mean, they were starting, as Bill said, getting old quick, turning gray. And just like the way I describe it to people that have not seen it as babies, it's like a person with jet black hair that starts graying. It's really a beautiful color. You know, so here I have a example. Only his hairdresser knows, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. All right, George, turn around and look at this. This was my first collie. We had a big discussion about this last night. That's why I said that. Well, yes. This is a sable-headed tribe. I had to have this picture tinted because this picture is nearly as old as I am. That's very old. We didn't have colored photographs in those days. Yes, George. You're so young, you don't remember. This bitch was my first collie. I knew that when I bought her, she was mismarked. I had gone to the library and read a little bit. I bought her in the early 40s for $35. She was out of a champion of a very famous line and a champion out of another very famous line that you could pick up any book and read about in those days. There were 2 sable-headed tries in the litter, and the rest were tries and blues. I picked this bitch because she was 35, and the $50 ones had normal heads. As far as I must have been kind of color crazy to start out with, but also it was my first paycheck, and I didn't have the 50. Anyway, I bred her to a dog called Champion Carico's Clipper, who was a white-factored tricolor. And she did have 9 puppies, and as it turned out, the only really good puppy in the litter was a sable-headed tri. So what else is new in breeding dogs? So then, Lewis and I Mr. Carico and I talked, and the next time I bred her to a homozygous pure sable male. And that's where I got my first show bitch. I kept this bitch till she was 14, but I never did breed her again. But Dot Girth and Dot had seen one before, and it just so happened I hadn't mentioned this yesterday, and George said he had just seen one. Hasn't this been recently, George?
No, it's been a while. This looks like it's got masking, is that correct?
She had a mask.
Because the one I saw was a blank face, looked like a pure sable.
No.
Anything you could ever believe.
This bitch had a mask, but she was a tricolor. She bred as a tricolor. But from there on down, her head was entirely sable, just like you painted it on. And Dot said that the ones she had seen didn't have any mask either. But this has been my only experience. Apparently these were more popular in the old days, and I don't know why. But I've never seen another one but Dutch, this bitch. Now I just want to add one thing before we quit. I want you to know that I'm not attempting to advise or encourage anyone on any color breeding or any kind of breeding they do in their own kennel with their own dogs. I feel that is a very personal thing. It should be behind bedroom doors, if you know what I mean, about like other personal things. It's your business, what you do. I'm not encouraging it. I would never encourage anybody to breed for any type color. But I do want to add this in closing. I feel that color should be the last consideration in all our quest for breeding the perfect color. Thank you.